Hey y'all, Dave here. Welcome to part 5 of the review of the Seven Types of Atheism by John Gray. In previous videos, we've discussed the various chapters, and in this one, the chapter is based on God haters, where he discusses the idea of Misotheism. And he discusses the biographies of people like the Marquis de Sade and Dostoevsky and a few others. And that's basically what this discussion is going to be about. So I'm joined by the ever awesome Rev. Thank you for joining me again, Rev. How you doing this evening, mate?
Very well. Thanks for having me. Just crack-a-lacking along here in Tennessee as always, and very, very happy to be here and have got through another chapter of this book.
I have to admit, I was slightly disappointed with this one compared to the others. What did you think of it?
Well, the first disappointment was I saw Marquis de Sade, and I thought, oh, this is going to be about 1980 songstress Sade.
There was no smooth operators in this one, was there?
No. Her Love is King and everything. Two different people, apparently not even from the same time period or even music genre. So a little disappointing, but that's probably on me. And for people not in the same generation, Sade, big thing back in the early 80s, mid 80s. It's still amazing today. One of my, and definitely not my go-to, but man, what an amazing voice. But
yeah,
again, a bit different than the Marquis de Sade. And the chapter I felt was very biographical and which is a continuing thing throughout the book. You, if nothing else, can learn a lot about time periods, people, and names that you see every now and then tossed around in memes or whatever, and you get a little more background without having to really invest a lot of time and effort into it. And the first guy up was the Marquis de Sade, who, of course, his big contribution to modern society is the word sadism.
The infliction of pain for pleasure. Yeah.
And I was a little, I read about him and little kind of sort of confused why he was included in this chapter of God haters. He certainly hated God, and I think the point John Gray was trying to make was, this guy, everything he did was motivated out of his contempt for Christianity specifically, not necessarily religion as a whole, but Christianity and God. And one of the distinctions I wish John Gray would have done a little better is kind of separated, does a person that's a misotheist hate God or religion or the Bible? Because we see all of that today, and Christians might say, well, y'all just hate God, and no. But in fairness, there's a lot of contempt for the religion, and there's a lot of contempt for the Bible that I think is very misplaced. And it's okay to not like the God character in the Bible. I mean, I think that's fair, and I also think with de Sade, reading a little more, I think maybe some of his stuff gets kind of romanticized a little bit, where it turns into this like anti-puritanical, but he was doing some pretty awful things. things.
He
And
was.
yeah, and
Um,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of people see him as sort of an anti hero fighting in the face of religious oppression. But really, he was kind of just a person who took great pleasure in inflicting great pains on other people. And it's something
Yeah,
that John
it,
Gray kind of discusses in this chapter, where perhaps part of that was the rebellion against the Christian values that were being pushed on society. But I think part of it was in him. It was almost serial killer like.
yeah, and it wasn't strictly about, you show up to this place, you put on some leather, whatever, and listen to some John Tesh music, and
Oh, you still
then,
there?
yep, I'm here.
Sorry, you stopped showing here for a second there.
Oh, sorry. Um, but people, they sort of show the the person going, coming out of the bank, in this business suit, coming, putting on his leather and made to, get uh, the submissive whole thing, and then he puts back his suit and off he goes, and life is normal. And of course, you have the puritanical objection to that. But I think with Desaad, what he was trying to do, because he didn't care about being put in jail, like they would
No.
imprison him, and he came from a very privileged aristocratic background. So for him, they would just go through the motions, and it was more about putting it in the face, but hurting and humiliating a lot of people in the process
Yeah.
to go through his own what he felt was necessary to do to feel better about you know the pleasures that were denied him.
Yeah.
And and I think you see, even like with the current modern day Church of Satan, um, which I support, is especially from a political, having a place that can keep, like Ten Commandment statues out with the threat of another statue, that I think is important. And it's a common atheist trope to say, oh, there's no church, there's no structure, there's no organization. Yeah, there is. And it's good that we have that, because
Yeah.
it's good to have something that's established and in place. Now, that said, a lot of it gets kind of silly to me and performative, and really still incorporates a lot of Christianity into what they do. And, me, I just as soon push away from all of it, and
Yeah.
not, confuse it. But again, a lot of what they do isn't because necessarily, and I think this might be the point of John Gray's making, is if you're living your best secular atheist life and pushed away from it, but if you have to drag down religious or Christianity, then what you're doing is less sincere.
Yeah. Yeah. If all you're doing is fighting Christianity, that feels less about creating your own values and creating your own sense of existence than it does fighting back against some kind of perceived authority.
Yeah, and that's a question an atheist should ask himself: am I committed to critical thinking, reason, and logic, or am I trying to win a meme war on Twitter?
Yeah.
And if I'm doing that, then that's more back to the first chapter where he talked about it being largely for entertainment purposes. or how
Yeah.
you feel. So if you are, I guess, doing it for shock value, and um and again, that's, boundaries have to be pushed, but also, um the one thing I do think it was good about the inclusion of the Marquis de Sade is, we say we're going to push the boundaries, um, but we still need boundaries.
Yeah. And
And
I
I
think
think
that's
people,
kind of why he highlights the Marquis de Sade in that one. He's like,
yeah,
um, this is what can happen when you're so powerful that you can push the boundaries, but nobody can push back against you.
that's right. And having a, it doesn't all have to be puritanical pearl clutching, but,
Yeah.
you know, uh, basically the Marquis de Sade's idea was that my need for pleasure outweighs women's rights to live their lives without my interference.
Yeah.
And you need an ability to say no, that's wrong, and it's not going to come from science. It's
Yeah.
needs to come from some values that we have as a society.
Societal values. Yeah.
Yeah, and the reality is for a lot of us, just because we can't go and reset the clock on it, it's going to be Judeo-Christian values that have been built on for decades and centuries, and it just is what it is. And
Yeah.
so there just needs to be some, people always kind of, while pushing the boundary out is a good thing, maybe somebody pushing back a little bit ain't the worst thing either.
That tug of war in virtue ethics, there's this idea where the virtue is located in the median, the sort of mean. Too much bravado is bad, too much cowardice is a vice. Bravery is somewhere in the middle between bravado and cowardly. And that's sort of what's kind of Marquis de Sade thing. There is the pushing back against the sort of morals pushed onto us by something like Christianity. But he goes into the element of vice, whereas the happy median, the virtue is somewhere in between the Marquis de Sade and the puritanical approach of very sort of evangelical Christianity, so to speak.
Yeah, and I certainly understand that there is a, well, who gets to decide what these boundaries are? That's the difficult part of being in a society.
Yeah,
And yeah, I don't know, but I do know this, that in the United States at least, um, whether you are on the red side or the blue side, it's going to be largely, uh, the direction is going to be dictated by religious people, and some of that you just have to accept and work with, and fighting back against all religion and all Christianity. Um, it's a pretty lonely endeavor.
it is. And I mean, that argues that once we cast off God, we have to create our own values. And I think that's sort of, it's sort of, he's hinting at something like you're saying, where it's Christianity goes too far, but nihilism and no values also goes too far. So the creation of these new values that we need to do is, it basically is something that we all have to come together and understand what we're all willing to put up with. Um,
Yeah,
sort of,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and ultimately that's an ideal, right? And that ideal has to be elevated, and it has to have authority. It's sort of
Yeah.
like, and we did a very poor job of it in this country, but all men are created equal.
Yeah.
Um,
Unless you're
that,
one.
yeah, or a woman. And well, of course you're
Yeah.
not, but you should know that. Um, but that's an ideal, and even the U.S. Constitution has a sort of a I don't know what the right word is, but much like the Bible, it's its own sort of entity that has way more authority than a because we gave it to it. So there is this definite force of people are willing to go die for that piece of paper,
Yeah.
and certainly people that didn't benefit the most from it are willing to do that. And so if they're whatever that ideal is, you call it, um that as a society you decide to respect, that again, that's not a science thing. That is a religion or a philosophy. There doesn't need to be a divine creator or a heaven and a hell, but there needs to be a something where if we're just pushing back on anything remotely religious, we're not moving anything anywhere.
No, no. Um, and I think that's kind of one of the problems that a lot of atheists sort of have today is that, and I mean, we can kind of see it in some of the responses to this series where anything that might be even remotely religious needs to be purged.
Yep.
Like a lot of the complaints that we've had are simply the fact that we're using what they perceive as religious language in relation to something like science.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of a dangerous approach because
Mm-hmm.
it sort of hints at what he's saying. Yes, we need to remove ourselves from religious ideals, but we still need some of that existentialist sort of um, governing of values that religion gives
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. And you're talking about the F word, right?
Yeah.
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 You can't say the F word. And yeah, part of me is like, nah, that's a good word.
Yep.
It's a George Michael song. I mean, come on, and
Yeah.
love has religious and annotations, and but man, if George Michael makes a song about it and tells you you gotta have it, I think that's
You
worth
gotta have it.
listening to. You gotta
Yeah.
have it, yeah. And um and it doesn't, again, you atheists do not need to hear the word science and faith in a same paragraph and poop their pants. They just don't. And
Yeah. They don't.
it's just no. And faith is faith. We all have some sort of point of it in our life. And the other one that drives me nuts is it's belief without evidence, which I don't think is even possible. We have a reason for what we believe. We have
Yeah.
some evidence, and maybe there's better evidence. There's better conclusions, but all your beliefs that you hold are held because of evidence. And
Yeah.
so the faith the faith is a something that, again, I think you get in this engagement mode. You hear the word faith and then you poop your pants, and then you go into poopy pants engagement mode, and it just it doesn't need to happen.
I mean that sort of happened today in one of my videos. You saw it, didn't you? Where the guy
Yeah.
just heard the word faith and he came in full on charging to put the Christian in his place, and he kept telling me You need to prove your God exists. And even though I said, I'm an atheist, not only am I an atheist, I'm an explicit atheist. I believe gods don't exist. And he turned around and he said, yes, I'm an atheist. It means I believe gods don't exist. Now prove your God to me. He was so eager to put me in my place and to sort of teach the religious person a lesson that he was just as fanatic as any evangelical Christian who was determined to, or say a Christian nationalist who was determined to turn the USA into a non-religious country kind of thing.
Yeah.
So focused.
Yeah. And to this fellow's credit, once he took a breath and stopped, loading up the memes and the scripts and everything, and to his great credit, just and again, nobody, I don't want to speak for you, but you don't need them to agree with you, but just at least
understand what's being said.
Yeah. And he did, and then he was like, oh wow. And so that's rare. That is very rare. And here's the thing, he didn't lose, right? He didn't lose anything. Christianity didn't make big gains in anything. And that was really, really nice. And there was another comment that we had from a Christian that came in and was, which made me feel good too, that people can watch this and, again, not necessarily agree with us, and but at least listen. And that's going to you're never going to get, why would someone listen to you if you hate their God or you hate their religion or you hate their Bible? And none of that. You just see so much of that. And if that's what you feel, okay, fine. But y'all ain't doing anything. You're just kind of spinning your wheels in the mud.
That's it. I see that kind of reaction like that guy gave today as the guy standing on the street corner yelling about how tomorrow is going to be the end of the world.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to pay attention to him because he's just a sandwich board wearing lunatic yelling at people, saying how crazy they are.
Yeah. And again, we see that here. We'll see people doing that sort of thing here in Tennessee, and they'll be talking, and even people, again, that are probably predominantly, at least culturally, Christian, are just kind of looking like, let's leave these people alone. They're here in the market square walking around, and nobody needs this. We're out, we pushed away from YouTube, we're outside, we're walking around, and talk. We got our dogs with us, for Christ's sakes. You know what I mean? It's time. Dog don't need to be listening to that. And again, and it's not just a discussion. It's a your hearts are hardened by God and blah blah blah, and and all that kind of thing. And I don't like to hear that too, but I also don't like to hear the same sort of rhetoric from anybody, really.
Yeah. If you wanted to listen to hate, you tune into the 100 Club or the 700 Club or whatever.
Yeah. And that's where you see a lot of people, and they're like, it was an evangelical, and I feel like there should be a 0 point that people have to pass through, where it's like, I believed all this stupid dumb shit, and now that makes me an authority to yell at people, and and I'm like, what point did you say, how did I ever believe in that stupid dumb shit, and and delusional and this, that, and the other thing, and what gives me the ability now to speak And it'd be like somebody having a heart attack because they're unhealthy, start, preaching to people about, this is a diet you should have or whatever, without going back, evaluating, changing yourself, and then, speaking from experience about what you did to change your thinking. It's just like you got traded or something from one sports team to the next sports team. And the thing I've liked to say since I've been down here in Tennessee is you can take the Southern Baptists out of the church, but you can't take the Southern Baptists out of the Southern Baptists.
Yeah,
they're the same guy, bro.
Yeah, it's a perfect way to put it as well. I see it kind of like the ex-smoker.
Mm-hmm.
They've given up smoking, so now they're out to convert everybody to not smoke, and tend to focus on issues that didn't actually convince them. They focus on, say, the health issues rather than focusing on the issues of why people smoke, the stress, the relaxation. Some people smoke because of the image that they get from it, or like at work. I don't know if it's the same in the US, but in the UK, most people go out to have a smoke during work in those 15-minute breaks so that they can socialize and meet other people, and they ignore all that for the reasons that didn't convince them to stop smoking.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. You get, either way, without going through that 0 point of saying, now, like it'd be like cool if there was this like middle place where you get to figure all your shit out, and then you can go and be on the other side. But it's just, you're the same person, just screaming at a different direction. And
I mean, like you said in the last couple of recordings that we've done, where people tend to go on a sort of rampage without giving the others the grace to figure this stuff out, like they had the grace to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, absolutely. And right. And there's like, well, I got my shit figured out, so y'all have to hurry up and figure your shit out on my schedule. And it's there's that sense of urgency just isn't there. And even like hating on the Bible and stuff. And that's one that, because I'm kind of a book guy, and I'm always amazed when we have any books or any literature from 2,000 years ago. And again, those dudes back then were not writing that stuff for people today, and
No.
it feeds, again, it's almost like you still have this reverence for the Bible, and I get it in some cases, like maybe that's just a triggering thing for a person. That's fair. I can certainly understand people being traumatized or having, but that's different, right? I'm just saying, if you feel like the book should be banned or burned, you're just kind of stealing a Christian gimmick, and that's kind of lame. And also, at the end of the day, it's a book, and there is good stuff in it, and there is, I certainly don't regret knowing what I know about it, and there's certainly stuff that I still quote today. Sometimes I get confused if I read it in Shakespeare or the Bible, but I just kind of, depending on what room I'm in, just write it like that. But it's again, I don't ever regret knowing stuff, and it's definitely, there's bits that I think were pretty 2,000 years ago. They had some concepts of stuff we're still struggling with today. And I feel like, for, a bunch of Bronze Age goat sheepers or whatever, some of them had some decent ideas, and whatever got construed to what it is today and used for whatever, that ain't on them. That's on all the people in between and the people now. And I think we just as a species tend to think that whatever was ever done was for us today. So
Yeah.
what those people
Yeah.
were writing 2,000 years ago was for us today. So hating on God, that's something. Hating on religion is another, and then hating on the Bible. You see all of that, and I just think it's sort of performative, and
Yeah.
put it in its proper place and proper box, and everyone will be happy. But don't give it more power than it actually has. And the other thing too that he brings up in this book that's kind of a double-edged sword for Christianity, but Christianity was one of the first religions that like had an explanation for suffering. And so God, God has kind of some answering to do because we're suffering here. And
Yeah.
again, just in every human's life, 2,000 years ago, they had questions. Why are my kids dying? Why am I sad? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? And most religions didn't care to answer that. And Christianity was, and the Abrahamic ones were the first to really say, hey, we're going to tackle why you're suffering. And there's just going to be some bad answers to that whole thing. And again, it doesn't make it right, but even if you decide that you want to take a nihilist kind of attitude, you still got to process it, and you still have to reconcile the way the universe is. And however a person gets to do that, I think it's for them. But at some place, we have to come with terms to the tragic events in our lives, and they're all a little different and all a little unique. And you can't really fault these people because science ain't ever going to answer that question for you. And
well, I mean, science, as far as suffering goes, science is just, well, we live in a universe that's indifferent. Everybody
right.
suffers, and that's just the way it is. Whereas when you turn to something like Christianity, I'm not so sure about Mormonism. And I think even in Islam, from what I remember, it's been like a couple of decades since I studied it. You have the theodicies, the soul building theodicies. The reason you're suffering is so that it can strengthen you and make you a better person and make you more compassionate. So I can understand why people choose something like Christianity over the nihilistic approach of, well, it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Shit to
Well,
you.
and honestly, in the first case, that's probably evolution getting us to the next stage or the next.
Getting
Right.
us over the hill.
If our brains tell ourselves, look, we're suffering to make ourselves stronger, okay, and we move forward and we accept it and we take our lumps and we take our L's and our losses and we hope for a better day. That group of people survives. And and again, and maybe that was one of the advances that we've made as a race in order to survive, not discover truth, but to survive. People believing that their suffering has reason and it'll help you,
has meaning.
And again, that's one of the things that the people that really hate on God or hate on religions, it's had its place, and it's probably been instrumental in getting you and I to where we are. Not the prettiest and not the best, and certainly not perfect, but that's how it all works, right? It isn't. it's just this sort of mindset was necessary that's why these guys survived and the other guys didn't. Maybe one of the reasons.
Yeah. I mean, you could argue that very pragmatic use. It's like pragmatism
Mhm.
is the truth is what works, so to speak. Religion works. There's no denying that in the past religion has worked. Sure, it's not working quite so well today because it's like progressive Christianity or, sort of liberal Islam or even Buddhism years. The religions that haven't adapted and haven't kept up with the times and kept up with these whole sort of shrinking world, as I like to call it, they're kind of dying out. We're seeing the death throes of some of those kind of religions at the moment, and it's why we have something like the Christian nationalists appearing in the
Yeah.
USA at the moment. Um, so even religions have to kind of evolve in their pragmatic purposes, and they work because they do have that pragmatic purpose. And like you say, they are what kept us going. They kind of bonded the community. They gave us a set of rules to live by. They gave people purpose, and like you said, they gave people meaning in the suffering that they've had. Well, my 13 children died in childbirth, not because we don't have the medical knowledge to keep them alive today. They've died because that it's there to strengthen us and keep us
Yeah.
going. Yeah.
Or if you knew that your kids are all going to die, you'd stop having them.
You stop. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
And so,
and if you thought that they were just dying and that was it, that there was no continuation of them, the fact that you might believe that yes, they died in childbirth, but they've gone to a much better place, you're like you say, you're more likely to keep trying to have those children.
mhm. Yeah, and ultimately, you know, a, you know, a person should have the right to handle their grief their way. And who are any of us to say if a belief in an afterlife brings you peace, um, then I'm pretty confident I don't need to be getting in front of that. You know.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, sometimes it kind of goes wrong, like the whole William Lane Craig explaining away the slaughter in the history of the Old Testament, saying, well, all those children that were dashed against the rocks have gone to a better place, rather than accept it, this is just a sign of a more violent time. But in some cases, like you say, it does help you get through that. Look at all this crazy shit that goes on in the world. All those kids that died of cancer have gone to a better place, rather than sit there and think, well, that was purposeless.
Yeah.
They just suffered for the sake of suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, and it gives us, and again, because we are all being culturally affected by it, it gives us a reason to be compassionate and to
Yeah.
be thoughtful, and we all have that, or most of us do in us, and again, so I'm certainly not going to church next week or anything like that, but um I think just a absolute, and again, there are definitely elements that need to be stood up against, and
Yeah.
the other thing even about Christian nationalism is if people stand up to it, it brings something up, and it gives new leadership. Something good will come out of that. hopefully, and that's a statement of faith on my part. I certainly understand that, but we've seen it in the
Yeah.
past where the forces us. If everything is working and everyone's content, then we don't. But a lot of tragedies have forced us to prevent these things from happening again, and that's moved us forward in
Yeah.
other ways and increased our ability to survive. So it's
Yeah.
it's a pretty simplistic approach to a very complicated and intricate system.
Yeah. And I think, I know it sounds daft, but like you keep mentioning, our brains aren't hardwired for truth or hardwired for survival. But our brains are very energy hungry systems. So we are often looking for the most
Mhm.
simplistic answers, the answers that take our brain very little energy to process, but achieve the maximum results of happiness and understanding, kind of thing. And I think religion, to some extent, does actually
Yeah.
give us that.
Yeah, and I've seen enough Jason Statham movies to understand that the reason why he's still here today is because the only thing he's got energy for is quick, witty statements and kicking, and kicking, and that's
And
it.
kicking. Yeah.
And
Although, although he was actually a pretty good actor before he moved over to America and became the action star that he was. So
yeah,
it shows that sometimes people.
yeah, but I think like you said in the other video that uh, sometimes we don't even have time for the quick, witty statement. We just
No.
gotta act and move. And
Yeah.
the idea that we are these wonderful, evidence processing scales that will, we're not. And
No.
Twitter is the best evidence for that, because it just doesn't matter what evidence you have, or and I'm even, like I was saying the other day, if with the analogy of Donald Trump reading to orphans, if you showed me a video of that happening, I would be absolutely insisting that it was you know uh, fake, orchestrated, um, photoshopped or something
Yeah.
like that. That would be 100% where my head would go. And then on the flip side with Jimmy Carter, I would 100% embrace it without even giving it a
You
second
wouldn't
thought.
even question it. Yeah.
And in fact, I would even build to the narrative. I would
Yeah.
even give it, unsupported assertions of this is the truth. And so we, like you said, we it's easier to assess the messenger than the message.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's it.
I don't trust this guy, um therefore I shouldn't. And we had a kind of an interesting little discussion, just kind of a side note, but before that, we're faith and science. And we were discussing, imagine if you were an African American, like say George Washington Carver in the United States, and you're listening to scientists tell you that you are genetically inferior, and every study shows that the superior races are European. Meanwhile, you're actually solving all the crises in the South by teaching white people how to not plant the same crop every single year, and you're inventing and innovative, and you got to listen to people tell you that you're just science is you're not as you're inferior, and all your people
Yeah.
are inferior. And then you look at all the experiments that were done, like phrenology, the Muskegee airmen,
Yeah.
and you want an example of somebody that would have no faith in science. I would say, early 20th century African American would be that
Yeah.
guy. And again, you could say, well, that wasn't science or anything, but that's what Christians say. Well, that guy wasn't a Christian, or it was what science was at that time to those people. And
Yeah.
it ain't all about equations, and there's a packaging that goes on this that I think a lot of people looked at and was like, yeah, no, nothing good's going to come out of this.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, I know people that say the Tuskegee experiments weren't actual science because those results aren't replicable. They weren't conducted in labs, they weren't conducted rigorously. But to the African American community, that is science because there's a bunch of scientists that came in and said, we're going to test these vaccines out on you. So if you have a history of this happening to you and being called science, there was a greater vaccine hesitancy during the latest pandemic among the African American communities than there was other sort of more affluent communities, the white communities, the white middle class especially. Um, you can understand why that hesitancy would be there because of that history, and a lot of people were more attacking them for being science illiterate. But it's not that they're science illiterate, it's that they have this different experience of what science is to them.
Yeah, no, they were like, look, we're going to take our chances at the pulpit rather, in your laboratory. And
Yeah.
and that was the choice that they wanted to make, was we'll stick with the church because it seems safer. And
Yeah.
So there's faith in science should be earned, and always questioned, and
Yeah.
always called out. And the one thing that science doesn't have is that absolute, like, no, this is the way it is. And that should be the good thing about it, is that it should be called out, and it should be challenged. And people that think the earth is flat, if they're holding that belief sincerely, then they should go out and test it. And that they should be commended for that. If that's, they hold that belief for however they got there, and they want to, intellectually, honestly go out there and find the best way to prove themselves either right or wrong. That's better than just sticking hardcore and being fundamental and dogmatic about things.
Yeah. If you say, well, this has been proven and it's unquestionable, you're kind of missing the point of falsification to some degree. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're embracing the doctrine of I am God and I said so.
Yeah. It's turning science into a divine revealer.
Yeah, yeah, or yeah, this is that. So, and I know that's a bit off of where we were going with, but
Yeah.
I promise, and I'm going to use my powers of prophecy here to prophesy that the last 48 minutes of this discussion, about 45 of it in the comments has been a discussion about faith. So we all get on topic as well. Stop typing about faith and start talking about hating God and religion.
Well, I mean, that is kind of the one thing that sort of disappointed me about this chapter. It's about Misotheism and the hating of God, and it focused on certain people. But there is stuff that wasn't mentioned, like like you were mentioning before we started recording. There are popular catchphrases like, how can I hate God?
Mhm.
God is imaginary. But then you have something like Christopher Hitchens, who says, if God does exist, we should shun him because God is this North Korean dictator in the sky kind of thing. And you have somebody like Thomas Nagel who says if God does exist, we should not want him to because God devalues us. Most people see it as a kind of anti-theism, where anti-theism is this idea that religion is to be opposed because religion devalues human experience. But there is a sense of overlap of misotheism and anti-theism in that respect.
Yeah, yeah, and he goes into Dostoevsky's writings and talks about some of the what the characters were saying, and um, I
Yeah.
felt like that kind of misses the mark a little bit. Um, and there's, like you had mentioned, there's better examples floating around in the last 50 years um, of
Yeah.
people that are acting out against God, and again, to act out against God and to live your life fighting God is, or religion is to really give it life. Um, and we've seen
Yeah.
movies that have had set that I can't think of one off the top of my head, but where the bad guy or the ghost or whatever is essentially empowered by the person's engagement with it, and um,
Yeah.
that's the more you engage with it, the more you fear it, the more you're angered by it, the more power it gets, and then when you walk away from it, right? I mean that's a thing, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that makes it. It's just reminded me of Star Wars, the scene. Yes, yes, give in to your hate. It empowers me.
Yeah,
The Emperor. Give in to your hate. It
yeah,
gives me power. And religion and sort of the idea of God and you hating it does kind of
yeah.
give it that, because the more you sort of hate the idea of God, the more it empowers Christians to believe that that's all that atheists do.
And
They
it
just
feeds
hate
into
God.
their martyrdom, right?
The
Yeah, yeah,
martyrdom, yeah.
and that's the other thing too. It's sort of like when you see a very cringy atheists, just again kind of borrowing the Christian gimmick of martyrdom and being like, well, we're under persecution, and it's in some cases that might be true, but it's the same, like, you know again, the same gimmick, just on the different side, where you're creating a force of good, a force of evil, a path of salvation, and an ultimate destination. That's pretty much Christianity. And um
Yeah.
giving religion, God, the Bible, or whatever, that status of the force of evil feeds into that. And that aspect, I
Yeah.
can definitely see it as a type of atheism or a feature of atheism that should be abandoned. And
Yeah.
again, we can speak
Yeah.
out against specific movements like Christian nationalism, address those speakers, those people, those ideas, speaking against inequality, oppression, But here's the thing, and then in America, in order to do that, you're going to need the help of a lot of other Christians to make that happen.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with the apologist and theologian Randall
I
Rouser.
know who he is. Is he the tentative apologist guy?
He is, yeah. And he's very good, and he's very defending of atheists, and he sort of reminds me of. Have you ever heard the Jewish parable, or I suppose parable's not the right word, but they argue atheists as being the work of God. They're there to help to make sure that believers are kept on the straight and narrow and can defend, and they're good because you have good atheists and they don't do it because of God.
Mm-hmm.
And they're there to remind the believers that, they shouldn't be doing this just for the sake of going to heaven or because they believe in God. They should be doing it just because they're good. Randall Rouser kind of reminds me of those kind of people. And when you lump Randall Rouser in with somebody like Greg Locke, you're actually doing more harm than good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and like I've probably said in every episode, and it bears repeating, the only way we kept the Senate was a black pastor in Georgia and all his followers, and so you got to accept that that's a big part of moving us as a society and a community forward, and just grand generalizations are just always have been and always will be super sloppy.
Yeah.
Just super careless and super sloppy. And, if we're truly, critical thinking and and again, not all of them for sure, but for some of them, because I'm always amazed when I talk to someone that's a Christian, like holy shit, you're not the worst person in the world, and I'm like, well, no, as long as you're not my mom, maybe. I'm probably not, but yeah, right. So and I always think like you must have had some bad experiences, and I mean that should be more. I mean, meeting an atheist shouldn't be like no one complains about Buddhists, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like it should be like, oh, that guy's cool, or that guy isn't, he's well thought, and and they're always like, wow, you actually don't listen to terrible music, and you're not wearing sandals and socks, and I'm like, of course I'm not, and so I mean, we can punch through some of the stereotypes that aren't good that we've earned to some degree, but again, at the end of the day, you can't hate the idea of a God and a religion and not understand the place it's had in getting us to this point.
Yeah. And so I'm gonna try and bring us back to the chapter a little bit. I think that's sort of what Dostoevsky is hinting at with some of his characters.
Yeah.
It's this idea that casting off religion does do that kind of thing. We do sort of need that idea of religion keeping us grounded. I don't really know how to put it. I'm sorry.
No, I think kind of maybe not all of us uniquely, but some of us do. And then in order to function as a society, it has its place.
It does, yeah. It's sort of like the law.
Yeah.
The law is sort of what keeps us functioning to some degree. Yes, there's people that break it. Yes, there's people that suffer from people that don't follow the law. But the law as a whole isn't a bad thing. And to some extent, the morality given by the Bible isn't entirely a bad thing. Like you were saying earlier, there is some good stuff in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And I know atheists like their whole fallacy bingo thing these days. So casting off everything in the Bible just because it's from the Bible and because it's goat herder is what's actually known as a genetic fallacy. It's dismissing something just because it comes from a particular source. I mean, even a broken clock is right twice a day, as they say.
Right. And the reality is what's been used to build to where we are. So of course, 2,000 years ago, things were going to be very crude and not well thought out, but it was the starting point.
Yeah.
And and it's what we have. So you can't undo any of that. And at least in the short term, you can make adjustments over time and abandon things. And maybe the solution isn't in the engagement I'm going to have today, but the long path, and the winning that race rather than trying to you know imagine wins and losses in the very, very short time.
Yeah. It's not about, as you put it earlier, it's not about the divine scoreboard in the sky. It's, you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there's no scoreboard that's keeping track of evidence. There's no scoreboard keeping track of burden of proof. And to say things like they have no evidence, as if you are referring to, like I say, some big balance in the sky tracking evidence and burden of proof. That's a pretty big statement of faith right there.
It is, yeah. Um, and I mean, I suppose to some degree this sort of hits home as to what Gray was talking about Dostoevsky, where when we get rid of God, we deify ourselves. Um,
Hmm.
so a lot of the atheists that argue that something like there is no good reason for that person to believe in God, they're sort of deifying themselves as saying something like, well, I know what all the good reasons are, and you can't have any.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a mission quality about that kind of a statement that is probably less that and more arrogance. But yeah, it's yeah, definitely something that Dostoevsky was getting at. And um, and again, his in making Satan the kind of the good guy too, in a
Yeah,
metaphorical sort of way. Um, again, you fight, if you just flip it on its end, it still is what it is. It's,
yeah,
if you just say, okay, let's make God the bad guy and Satan the good guy, it's still the same thing. It's still the same dynamic. We just changing which one we think is the
you just
better.
flip
And
the coin. Yeah,
yeah, and just push away from the whole thing altogether is maybe the better thing. But and again, the whole point isn't necessarily to and I keep saying this too, where I get pretty shook up thinking about what happened to the indigenous people, like in North America and in other countries. The You just can't remove religion from people. It isn't that I believe that religion is the best thing or that we should all embrace it, just the reality of how much it is a part of what we all are.
yeah.
And asking people or demanding that people remove it um is probably very detrimental to the balance of society. And um yeah, and I think most people would be like, no, the indigenous people should have been allowed to do what they've always done. But right, it's still religion, it's still delusional, and so on and so forth. And um they have their sky daddies, but you don't go to the Native American traditional celebrations and go, to your kids like, okay, they're all worshiping their sky daddies right now.
Yeah.
You have a certain reverence for it. And I think it's not necessarily a reverence to the religion, but just to the people. And this is how they've survived and how they know how to survive.
Well, I mean, to some degree, the keeping of those sort of spiritual and religious traditions of the Native Americans is somewhat reminiscent of the Jewish, is it dysphoria, where they all ended up in Babylon. It was the keeping of their traditions and their religion that kept them as the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And to some degree, that's a lot like how the Native Americans war is. It was that keeping of those traditions and the keeping of those beliefs that kept their history alive and kept
Yeah.
them who they were.
Yeah. Yeah. And instead of being, silly myths, it was their identity. And, and a lot of people believe like the creation story in Genesis, which was probably written in the time of the Babylonian captivity, or at least that's my very simple understanding, is probably a story told to give people the idea that God is rebuilt, after, like say the Great Flood. It really doesn't need to be a story about a flood, or when, God, the Bible, of course, doesn't say that God just created it out of nothing, but that, he built it, and that's what they were looking at, was their desolation, right? Everything
Yeah.
was taken away from them, but this is what God did for us before and built us up. So, those kinds of stories, kind of simple, I suppose, but it wasn't like an attempt to explain how we came to be necessarily, but maybe an attempt to give people an idea that things can be rebuilt again. And
Yeah.
and then that's in fact what happened. So they survived. So yeah, like I say, and religion frustrates me just like everybody, and I don't like listening to a lot of it. But I just think that it's just too interwoven to simply say it's a poison, or
Yeah.
and even if it was, it's kind of our poison, I guess. So
It also brings me back to a point that we've made in the past, like Christopher Hitchens' book, God is Not Great, Religion Poisons Everything. Um, the whole book isn't actually a treatise against religion as such. I mean, I think The God Delusion is a terrible book and has a lot of
mhm,
terrible philosophy. But at least that covers religion in a slightly wider sense. I think Dawkins misses the point in a lot of stuff. But Christopher Hitchens' book, Religion Poisons Everything, all he's talking about in that is really Christianity. And
yeah,
it's the conflation of Christianity with the whole of religion. And I think, like we've said before, a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that all of religion is just Christianity. And you see it online. Um, like people mistake theism for Christianity. Well, all theists believe that gay people should be tossed off buildings, but in actual fact, there's a lot of religions that actually kind of revere
mhm,
transgender people.
yeah,
They see them as the double spirited, so to speak.
yeah. Yeah, and there's religions that were started by atheists. We learn that in this book. There's religions that
Yeah,
don't have a whole lot to do with the divine creator, like Buddhism. Everything's not street corner Southern United States evangelicalism, and it's just sloppy to treat it like that. And it's also, religion doesn't have to be what it is today. It will probably take a new form, that again, and it's to propagate the species, nothing more fancy than that. And it'll probably take a different size and shape. And my guess is, if we make it another 500 years, today's Christianity isn't going to work then.
no,
You know,
it won't. And
no,
I suppose religion is like any other human thing where it adapts and evolves.
Yeah.
Um, it's trying to wipe it out is akin to trying to wipe out any other human instinct that we have.
Right. And there people will say it's been around now for 2,500 years just to control people. And yeah, and maybe that ain't the bad thing. It's
Yeah,
probably what we need. So we're not running around, and chaotic. So
yeah,
yeah, it'll probably be to control us, and for those people that want to live outside the boundaries or have to live outside the boundaries, uh, that's rough. But
yeah.
um, there's got to be some element of control in that. But the last guy he spoke about was William Epson, who I'm not terribly familiar with, but
No,
more,
no.
yeah, more contemporary, and he's kind of got like a 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon relationship with Bertrand Russell, um, through John Stuart Mill, basically. But
Yeah,
um, he's again kind of more pleasure centered, and that was kind of the common theme through the chapter was uh, that life should be about enjoying pleasures, and whatever that is for people, that should be the ultimate um, goal. And I kept thinking this is a lot like Ayn Rand, where
yeah.
you can just see how dumb that is, I guess. Yeah, we should be able to, and again, the vast majority of even religious people are not embracing a puritanical Amish sort of life. We're always probably going to be inclined to be judgmental towards the things we don't understand or that are different. That's a human thing, not a religion thing.
It's part of our evolutionary psychology, unfortunately. Our
Yeah,
brains are just hardwired for that.
yeah, and you see that, and I know we've mentioned this, but it's been very disappointing how some of the secular community has been just absolutely abysmal with handling the transgender community.
Yeah,
And you would think or like to think, okay, these people do not have the puritanical restraints. They don't have to. They don't care about a man and a woman, and this is what marriage is. But yet they still have these horrible views on transgender issues. So religion doesn't fix that, or the removing of religion doesn't address that. It's a human thing.
and the ironic thing is that there are a lot of religious people that do accept it. Um,
Hmm.
Whereas when you go to the secular side, they're using science to justify their hatred of it.
Yeah,
When
yeah, and
really it is just a psychological thing.
yeah, and yeah, we had that kind of discussion where there was a lot of religious people that were just like, hey, the Bible says all men are created equal. That's what it
Yeah.
is. The end. No more discussion.
Love your
And
neighbor, treat people
yeah,
well. Yeah, love everybody. Whereas when you base it in science, that sort of ethos doesn't really come into it. You could argue that evolution makes everybody equal, but the same people that are arguing for something like evolution are turning around and saying, well, evolution doesn't give us transgender people. These are just
yeah,
like, they're mentally unwell people.
yeah, yeah, or not. We should be, they have no purpose in procreation. So
Yeah,
whatever they've said in the past. So the human element is the problem, and
yeah,
you have people using the religious aspects of it and the secular aspects of it for good or for bad. But again, I think that's just human nature to be pretty judgmental and uh, oppressive towards people that are different.
And to worry about change, because change might mean the dying off of particular, not strands of humans, that's not quite the right word, but there will always be a sense of a battle between the conservatives who want things to keep going because they know it's safe and they know that will keep the human species going, and those who want change because change is what's needed to keep the human species going.
Yeah, and there again, it's probably because the brains are all different,
Yeah.
conflicting, and
Yeah.
that is one of the other atheist tropes I hate is the we're all born atheists, as if our brains are all routers that are bought at Best Buy or something like
Yeah.
that,
The
and they all
we
have
come off a factory line with
yeah,
default settings. Yeah.
which ironically is a great argument for a purposeful creator.
Yeah. And it is rooted in a purposeful creator. It's like saying that evolution has a goal for us. It's created us
Yeah,
a particular way rather than evolution is just the way things turned out.
yeah, and again, it's the whole Christian culture idea of we're special.
Yeah.
We're the ones that all this was made for.
Evolution has chosen us as the standout species, whereas we just got lucky more than
Yeah,
anything.
yeah, and if you think like there was some gods, Kurt Vonnegut had it in his books where they had this transformorgolians or something like that
Yeah.
essentially watched the earth, and I was always thinking, man, if I was watching the seasons that had all the dinosaurs, that would have been dope. And then now it's,
Yeah.
it's these boring old human guys. But man, I'd have been. That's probably why the dinosaurs lasted for millions of years, is they were entertaining.
Yeah.
Cool to watch.
And they look better than we did.
Yeah. All the colors and the whatever's. Yeah, I would tune in to watch that for sure. But yeah, it's again another chapter, probably my least favorite of the ones so far.
Same. Yeah.
In
Like,
not Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, like you said, there's a lot of great biographical information in there,
Yeah,
but not so much on the actual ideologies of Misotheism or the
yeah,
sort of what people argue for Misotheism.
yeah, yeah. I feel like the chapter should have been there, but should have been like some of the philosophers that you mentioned, or like because he's mentioned Dawkins and he's mentioned Sam Harris. He could have certainly mentioned Hitchens
Yeah.
and talked about that. And and again, I wouldn't confuse Hitchens with a philosopher, but at the same time a very vocal atheist,
Yeah.
and um, definitely religion hating atheist as well.
Yeah.
So that would have been like a better selection, and to discuss that and discuss some of the problems. And I always feel like Hitchens has always been super cringy to me, but I'm older and I didn't like his politics, and that's
No.
like the atheist stuff, like and again, I didn't disagree with him on absolutely everything, but I never like got into his atheism part because I was kind of appalled by a lot of his political um, nonsense. And
Yeah.
uh, people like talking to him as if he's this great guy we should be toasting drinks to. I'm always kind of like, that's
Well, I
pretty.
mean, that's the thing. Everybody, if you look to the atheist community, there's always some talk going on of who is the next Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah.
There's this sort of prophethood bestowed upon him, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, well, they called them the Four Horsemen. Where do you think they got that from?
Yeah, exactly. Um, and I think one thing that always did kind of interest me about Hitchens, and something that not a lot of people paid attention to, but there's always an argument that goes on in the atheist community that's all that's needed for morality is empathy. And Christopher Hitchens is kind of a good example of this because he used to argue for enhanced interrogation. And
Yeah.
he argued for waterboarding and saying, waterboarding is what we need for these Islamic terrorists. And he was always very much for it. And there was one time where he volunteered to be waterboarding. And as soon as he was waterboarded, he was anti-waterboarding.
Yeah.
And it shows that empathy doesn't quite work. Sometimes you need the lived experience of the other to be able to actually have that empathy. You can't put yourself into somebody else's place without that experience. So empathy isn't the thing needed for morality.
Yeah.
It's useful, but empathy doesn't give us morality as such.
No. And you see that a lot too with the when it happens to them. And then
Yeah.
now I'm whatever that is that I was against before, but now that it's happened to me, I'm right in the front of your ranks now.
Yeah.
And where was the empathy before? But
Yeah.
so that's a real good point. And again, just to tie it up, maybe one last time, when people and to bring it to something that's a little more relevant than the Marquis de Sade is when if you think you're in a war with theism or Christianity, or there's something to be won or lost, or that your engagement is something that's helpful, it's really just a poor form of entertainment ultimately. Yeah. And you're off the mark. And we're all, and those guys should have been a little smarter than they were. It just and again, that doesn't to say that there aren't things that need correction. There aren't things that need to be discussed. And there are some things that are bad, but, an engagement type attitude or a win-loss attitude, not even, and then changing your whole vocabulary and definitions and ideas of how things work, just to win an engagement, it's just not, it's not moving the needle at all.
No. And it almost seems to me like they're complaining that religion is in control of their lives, and say, religion is trying to force me to live a particular way. But actually, they're forcing themselves. They're still letting that religion kind of control them by the definitions that they use, or the words that they use.
Yeah. If you can't use faith, and if you, and it's like we were saying before, if you've got this worldview that there's a good force and an evil force and a path to salvation, that's still kind of a Christian thing there.
Yeah. Excellent point.
Yeah. So I guess that's, this chapter, I wish it would have dealt with more of that, I guess.
Yeah.
But it did strike up a good discussion and a good conversation. And I definitely think, Misotheism is definitely something that does need to be addressed. I just kind of feel like and maybe this is a good thing that this guy doesn't probably have a Twitter account or something.
Yeah. He'd already be bombarded by all those new atheists by now.
Yeah, he's out doing his like fox hunting and whatever, and like he's the fox hunting sportsman and not the rugby pub guy.
Yeah. The next chapter sounds pretty interesting, though, because it's where he starts going into the atheisms that he agrees with.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in this because the title of the next chapter is Atheism Without Progress,
Yeah.
which is it. But again, if you need progress, that is kind of a Christian, that is the point of doing all this, is we're progressing towards another goal. And that's not to say we can't make progress, but at the same time, we don't need to have progress for our life to be meaningful.
Yeah.
We don't need working towards heaven. Or what
No.
was that fancy word you're using about character building,
Theodicy?
suffering?
Soul
Yeah, that
building theodicy? Yeah.
Yes, the Odyssey. Thank you. Yeah, we don't necessarily need that. And yeah, just push away. So when you push away from religion, maybe that's what we need, is a better understanding of how to push away from that. And then again, it's because it's so interwoven into us.
Yeah. And I mean, there's arguments from historians like Tom Holland who say that we owe a great amount to Christianity, and a lot of what we have is due to Christianity. A lot of morals are based on Christianity, and I think he oversimplifies it a little bit, and he gives a bit too much credit
Mm-hmm.
to Christianity for what it is, and Christians kind of do it now as well. Like, to have morals as an atheist, you have to steal from the Christian worldview. Um, and you, on the opposite end, you have atheists who say, no, no, what about the Greeks? Um, and they deny any influence. And I think there needs to be a kind of happy medium with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if Christianity has given us let's just say, here's another word that people hate, but spiritual,
Yeah,
to deal with our suffering, then that has a value.
it
And
does.
and there just has to be a value in people having their burden lessened and
Yeah,
getting relief, even for just a short time. There needs to be a value in that, and that's okay. It's okay to just to be at a funeral and for a bit just think about a person being in a better place.
yeah,
you know um, we should be able to somehow work that into um, our way of living our life. But yeah, the next chapter, Atheism Without Progress, that's certainly Twitter.
yeah.
There's no progress there.
No, there's. It's just a constant tug of war where the handkerchief never moves over the line.
Yep. Yeah, it's like the eternal tractor spinning its wheel in the mud.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, it's like that dude in the Greek mythology that had to push the rock up the hill.
Sisyphus. Yeah,
Yes, yeah, except the modern day Tennessee version is a tractor in the mud just going,
yeah.
and some
We
guy just
must.
sitting there
We
flooring
must
it for
assume
all
that the
eternity.
tractor is happy.
Yeah, but yeah, no, and thanks again for everybody that's been watching these and
Yeah,
and commenting.
and
And
both for the kind words and the angry words.
yeah, 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 you ain't gonna hurt our feelings, that's for sure.
No, I'm
But
too
it's
stupid to have my feelings hurt.
yeah, and I'm not self-aware yet, so um,
Maybe the next episode.
yeah, maybe the next chapter is the one I become self-aware. But no, I appreciate the people taking the time just to leave thoughts, um and that's great. So anybody that's watching it, I appreciate it, and I thank you, Dave, for dealing with me once a week. I know
Oh
my
no,
wife
no, I
appreciates.
love it.
I know my
I
wife
think
appreciates the break.
Emma's the same. She gets to go to bed early and watch what she wants to watch on TV without me pestering her. So yeah, it works out for all of us.
Yeah.
And I love the conversation. I'm
Yeah.
thinking
Yeah.
we need to find something else to discuss once this book series is over.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can open it up to the discussions, and I'm thinking it won't be faith,
No.
but unless we want to break down the George Michael album, I'm game
Yeah.
for that.
Well, I'm pretty sure that by the end of this, I'm going to have some atheist track me down and kind of, I'll be the first atheist killed in the name of protecting atheism kind
Yeah,
of thing. Yeah.
other atheists.
Yeah, that's it. So, we'll find something else to discuss.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
I'd love to keep this going because honestly, it's one of the highlights of my week at the moment.
Well, I appreciate it, Dave, and it helps me. And this is the kind of discourse where I learn, and like I say, this chapter wasn't. If I would have read it and just that was it, I would have forgotten it quite soon. But reading it with the knowledge that I'm going to have to talk about it and kind of thinking about it more, and then realizing, oh yeah, I actually got a lot to say about God hating and religion, an anti-theistic approach to things. So having the ability to do that really made it all sort of sink in a little better.
That's how progress is made in philosophy, dialecticals.
Yeah.
Dialogues, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and again, we can progress, but atheism doesn't need to.
It doesn't need to, no. I mean, it kind of does. It needs to progress from the memes, but
Yeah. that is like our atheist Old Testament gods are memes.
It really is. Okay, I've just realized we've been going an hour and a half, so we probably should wrap up.
Yep.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's always a fun discussion. And like you said, thank you to everyone for watching. And I'll catch you on Twitter probably later on, Rev.
you got it. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Good night, mate. See you soon.
Got it.
Bye.